On the 4th of March, the House of Keys will choose 4 people to become members of the Legislative Council. Prior to that vote, Agenda will be speaking with all the candidates so that you can find out more about the people who hope to become national politicians. We hear this week from businessman Peter Reid, who is hoping to get elected to LegCo at his second attempt.
Yeah, well, I used to work in financial services in terms of working for one of the banks, and my basic background has been sort of operations and strategic sort of planning, that sort of thing. Latterly, I've been the chairman of the independent chair of the skills board on the island, and also sit on the board of the FSA. So it's been really keeping me busy. I've been very active in committees on the island for education and things like that. The IOD, the London Institute of Banking and Finance. So financial background mainly.
And that background obviously gives you some knowledge of the political process, and yet you still want to be a member of the Legislative Council.
Yeah, it's something that people keep saying to me. Why would you want to put yourself through this? But I am really keen to make a contribution. We all know that there's lots of things that are being criticised and that people think are not going well, and I don't want to be one of those people that sits there criticising. I want to get involved and try and do something positive, and use some of my skills to try and help on the island, and that's my drive for doing it, really.
So I suppose then, in terms of your experience, you mentioned obviously banking. Where are we on the Isle of Man when it comes to banking? Because it used to be a big part of the Manx economy. It's perhaps less so now, is it? Or
well, it's still the biggest part. If you take finance, I would say banking's developed into finance, which is more insurance, and banking and financial services, so wealth expertise. And the one thing with the Isle of Man is there is a massive amount of talent on the island. As well as that, you've got to be really good at compliance nowadays, because obviously there's all cross-border issues. There's things where countries are changing their laws, and if we're operating here and abroad, that can be really a tricky course to tread if you don't know what you do. Again, on this island, we have a huge amount of expertise, and more so than I've actually seen when I was working in the UK. So in terms of the industry, it's a healthy industry. There's been some consolidation, where banks have come together, or insurance companies have come together to get better economies of scale. But in terms of the actual industry, it's a very healthy industry.
Is there too much bureaucracy associated with banking? Certainly most people who try to open a bank account would suggest that it's too bureaucratic.
Yeah, I think it depends what you're opening, doesn't it, and where you're opening it and who you are. So there can be a lot of bureaucracy in terms of opening accounts, and I appreciate that. But they're really safeguards to make sure that people, open the right sort of accounts, but also the right sort of people open accounts. You only have to look at, the amount of scams that are going on nowadays, and the way that people, money laundered around the world, to say that if we're going to operate a substantial financial services here, we have to be absolutely brilliant at doing all of that. And the Isle of Man is, we have got a very good financial services on the island that's very, if you look at it compared to some countries, it's a very good regime in place, and it protects consumers, but it also, protects people around the world, because the island is used as an outreach as well to other places in the world. So yeah, I guess there is, but you could maybe look at the money laundering and all the rest of it to say, well, that has to be there, for a reason.
You mentioned the skills board as well. What do you do on the skills board? What's that that role all about?
So the Skills Board was originally set up to try and use not just government and education, but also the business side of the island and the commercial side of the island to come together to understand what skills do we genuinely need on the island, and that's in two parts. So what are the skills we need now immediately, and what are the skills that we're going to need in 2 or 3 years' time? And you might just say, well, you just have to have a look at the jobless numbers, and that will tell you, won't it? Well, it doesn't, because firstly, the numbers are not that accurate. So what we're doing, we're in the process of trying to get that so that it's a regular jobless information, or people in work information as well, and that can then tell us where the job market is, but also what are the skills that are needed on those gaps. But the second part of it is really important, and that's sort of saying, well, in 2 or 3 years' time, there are jobs that are actually starting to convert into other jobs. If I took financial services as an example, AI and digital banking is having a massive impact. And if you look at places like the UK, where there's been 30 or 40% attrition in banking, because of the changes in the way that people use phones, the way that AI has taken over a lot of things and does a lot of the work for you. And so the expertise needed maybe 3 years ago, or definitely needed 3 years, is very different to the expertise now. So that's just one area of where we're looking at. But once we can get that really accurate picture that's data led, what we then want to do is to say, right, now what can we put up against that demand and say, there's the short term bit, what do we need to do to fill those gaps, and what do we think the long term is, and how do we fill that? That's what we're all about.
So then moving on to LegCo, were you to be successful, one of the first things that you will find is several ministers ringing you up saying, would you like to be a member of my department? Where do you stand on that?
I definitely would want to do that. That would be 100% something I want to do. And the reason for that is, as I said before, I want to try and offer my skills that I've got and try and help, in any way that I can. Obviously, it's about legislation and about the revising chamber, and I completely, I love detail, so that's great for me to be able to do that. But to be involved in some of the departments would be a real, privilege to me. And I guess I have been with the Skills Board. We've been working really closely with, 3 of the ministers who actually sit on the board. And I found that really, important, because they're the decision makers at the end of the day. So I'd be very keen to be involved.
There are people who argue that Legislative Council is purely there to scrutinise legislation, no more, no less, and to retain its independence, and to be able to impartially scrutinise legislation. Then members need to keep off boards. I mean, how would you respond to that?
Well, I do understand that point of view, and to some extent, I think 80% of the work has to be that, and which I'd love to do, and I guess we have been doing that a little bit if you think about some of the roles that I've done before. But I do think that if you can offer more, then you should offer more. I also believe that you want to give value. So if you have expertise that you could give, then I believe that should be taken advantage of. So just from my point of view, that's why I'd be very keen to get involved, maybe in finance, or or even in some areas that I haven't experience in, but I understand strategy, and I understand how to run things and how to look at delivering value. So from my perspective, I think if you've got that expertise, why wouldn't you want to use it?
And again, in terms of that tension that exists, perhaps that's the best word for it, between Keys and LegCo, that there does seem to be a view quite strongly expressed these days that LegCo is purely about legislative scrutiny and nothing else, and yet as a Tynwald member, you'll be there to pass judgment on policy, and you'll be there to pass judgment on financial matters. So it's a bigger role than just focusing on legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that. I think it is a bigger role. And that's why, I'm putting myself forward. You get a vote, really, and if you think about that, that's really important. And again, getting back to what I said at the beginning, so many people complain to me about what's happening. And I always say, well, what do you think we should do about that? What do you think you should do about that? And that's not as forthcoming. And I want to be able to actually make a contribution and be positive about, well, yeah, okay, this is happening, but how can we improve it? And legislation's a great way to actually do that. If you look at what's been going through last year, going through at the moment, there's lots of opportunity to make improvements to what we do on the island.
And then, I suppose, the knowing that Keys, in the end, retains responsibility for policy, and ultimately, whatever you say and whatever you do in LegCo, Keys can outvote you if it chooses to. You hadn't ever thought about having a crack at the House of Keys?
No, I think I'm a person, I love detail. And, I've always believed the devil's in the detail. And for that reason, that's why I really would relish doing the role that we're talking about, because you can get stuck into the detail and understand it in such a deep way. And once you have that understanding, you can then look at, well, what do you think is right and wrong, and what needs to be revised, what doesn't. So that actually appeals to me far more. And that's probably, been, if I say I'm successful in the roles I've been in before, it's really understanding the framework that you're operating in and making sure that what you're trying to put forward, it's easily understandable, but more importantly, that it does what it says on the tin, type of thing. So, I actually would look forward to do that. And again, a lot of people would say, well, you're mad, why? But that's always been my sort of role.
As a member of LegCo, then, you will have the opportunity to scrutinise bills. How would you go about doing that? When a bill first appears in front of you and you know nothing about it, what's the steps that you think you would take to scrutinise that? Well,
I think understanding the bill, but understanding the context of what it's been put forward for as well is really important. I operate on quite a few boards and have done in the past, and often you'll get things completely fresh. The first time you see them is at the board meeting, and bear in mind you might get 200 or 300 pages of reading to do before a board meet. Now, to actually go through that and understand it, sometimes just reading it doesn't give you all the information you need. You have to actually go back to the author, you have to talk to people around you to try and understand, well, hang on, what was the context around this? Why is this change being asked for, or why is this revision being sought? And the reason for it is really important, I believe. So my first part is to try and understand in a deeper way what's before me and why is it there. I think the second part is, how does that, if you then think that is right and that don't need to be revision, which I'd be surprised, there's always things that people want to change, is if it is changed, will it still be effective in doing what it was put forward for in the first place? And we've seen that quite a few times last year, where things go through a few readings, and by the time it's finished, it's almost completely different from the first one. You would have seen that before. So, that's another big consideration. But my view is always, you've got to do the yards and really understand it and read it and get the context around it.
One of the things that Legislative Council is useful for, and certainly I know this from my time in the House of Keys, is to offer sage advice to members of the House of Keys. How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I mean, people often only believe what they say and not what other people say. So, I'm a great believer in using your ears in the proportion of your mouth and listening. So if I wanted to actually try and change somebody's mind, or even, you know, try and get a point of view across, I would really want to understand where they were first. And you know, listening and deeply listening, there's two different things, I think. So really understanding their perspective, you know, their point of view, why they're thinking the way they are, and then, you know, if I have a different view, sort of trying to put that to them in a way, but putting it in a way that is from their position rather than mine. And I think, you know, that's worked really well for me in the past, where I've had to change a board's mind or colleagues' mind that I've worked with, you know, to try and get them to understand it from a slightly different perspective. And that's always served me well. But that listening part is so critical, to understand why, because often you'll think, well, why are they thinking like that? Well, ask. That would be my approach.
It's not a bad philosophy, is it? So then, in terms then of of your political motivation, you know, what motivates you? What kind of politics excites you?
You know, one thing that I've learned on the skills board, for example, is it's a lot easier to do things when everybody's pointing in the same direction and when there's a common purpose. What really motivates me is having that common purpose, and then trying to sort of align, if you want to say all the arrows, but all the people in the same direction. So getting that consensus and actually moving things forward, that really does motivate me, because once you've got, it's like a rowing team, and once everybody's rowing at the same time, that boat goes really faster. And, you know, I've found that in my working life, that there's always issues, there's always problems. They generally come down to communication. And it's a great feeling when you actually achieve something, but it's been a bit harder to do that. But by doing the communication in the right way with everybody, listening, understanding the different points of view, getting consensus, understanding where you're all in agreement, there's a really fantastic piece at the end where, if it's been hard, it really feels worthwhile. So that does motivate me, and that always has. Sometimes having the difficult problems I much prefer than the things that are easy to do. So that would motivate me. And as I said to you before, you know, this island's been brilliant to me. You know, I've met my wife here. You know, I love the Isle of Man, and I won't be ashamed of saying that. I think it's a fantastic place. I want to do something positive, and, you know, have something to say. Well, yeah, actually, Pete did try and move things forward, and Pete, you know, in his way, did what he could to contribute as much as he could, and that really is all it's about for me, to be honest.
You mentioned there that the hard problems are more interesting than the easy ones. So,
yeah.
So in your estimation, and bearing in mind that you know, your electorate are the people who are responsible at the moment for possibly causing some of the problems, and certainly for solving the problems, where do you see the big, really difficult issues that face the Isle of Man?
I do think there's an issue at the moment around communication again, in that, you know, the government have been trying to do a lot of things, and if you look at the strategy for the island, and sometimes that communication can break down, because, you know, if you talk to somebody in the pub, or you talk to somebody on the prom when you're walking, or whatever you're doing, you can get a gauge of how well that's actually translating to people, and it doesn't always translate in the same way, I'm sure, that government wants it to. So I do think that there is a sort of a piece there around making sure that if we're going to make changes on the island, that, you know, they're well communicated and well ahead of time, not just at the last minute. I think it's so important. And if you think about the cost of living for people nowadays as well, you know, since COVID, everything has changed, I think. And, you know, there's a real piece there, you know, when we're looking at budgets and finance for the island, where we've really got to make sure that anything we spend from government, or anything that we spend on the island, really does focus on value, you know, and isn't just being done for the sake of it. That's the way I've worked ever since I've been in business, and that has really been a big success for us. And when I say value, that's the value of the customer or the value of the electorate. So, when you're talking about the health service, for example, it's all about how do we get the best value and how do we deliver the best service for, our patients. And it's often not what you think that needs to be done. The way that you save money isn't always, switching off a light for 10 minutes. It's actually doing it properly in the first place and doing it once. So that's the way I look at things, and I would do it.
As someone who has been used, I suspect, to deciding this is how we need to proceed and then proceeding, will you be frustrated by the pace of change in government?
I'm sure I will. I've experienced that, obviously on the skills board, for example, because to do simple things like getting the data right, it's a lot of changes in areas where we're doing it in a certain way and it needs to be done in another way. I worked in an organisation before where we had 120 odd thousand people working there at one time, and to make changes in that organisation took a long time. It wasn't something you could do quickly, but the first thing we had to do was to change the culture. Now in business, I think it's a lot easier to make change. Obviously not so easy when it's a whole island and it's a much more diverse sort of mix of people.
So why is it so much more difficult?
Well, I think if you look at it, the process that we have here actually is better than the UK. So we're saying why is it so difficult? But I can tell you, if I wanted to see a minister in the UK, it would take 6 months to do that. Here I could pick the phone up and I could be seeing somebody the same or the next day. So I think we put it in context of it's a lot quicker here to do things than it is anywhere else. But I think we're used to that. So part of the issue is that we expect things to happen quickly, and we are a smaller nation. So the thing is with that, we should be able to move quicker, and I think in some cases we do. But I guess that we expect a lot more all the time, and that's not a bad thing. That'll keep us on our toes. But I don't think it's that slow.
We have a few minutes left for you to extol your own virtues. So were I still an MHK and I was looking at the long list of candidates, why would I pick Peter Reid?
Well, I firstly think I've got a lot of really good relevant experience, not just in driving value in businesses and doing things in a really good way, but also since I retired from the bank, I've been working quite heavily with government already. If you look at the skills board and also if you look at what we've been doing on the FSA as well, we've been going through quite a big change there. Now, I'm not saying that makes me an expert all of a sudden in legal matters and everything else, but I have got a really good view and quite a unique view of where I think things could be improved or have expertise in areas that maybe not everybody has. On the strategy side, I've done a lot of work on strategy for insurance companies in the UK previously, and also in financial services, but we've also done all of our strategy on the skills board as well. And I've worked for the Institute of Directors for some time. I'm an ambassador on there, so I do understand how the mechanics work, and I think that is something that would add value. I also think, as you mentioned before, that were any of the ministers thinking, well, we could actually utilise Peter as well in some of the departments where he could add value. I do think that I can add value, and I do think I have maybe a more unique skill set that could enable us to do things in maybe a slightly quicker way. So that would be my main. But the last thing I would say is, I dearly love the island and I want the island to do well. and whether that be in the way that we develop, forward, and prepare things for, better economy. I believe in the culture of the island. I've always supported that, and I think that we're in a unique place. I serve on the biosphere on the technical subcommittee, and we are the only biosphere nation in the world. I mean, that is absolutely fantastic. So there's so many things that are positive, and if I can just be a part of that would be fantastic. If we could be more successful and make somewhere great for everybody to live, in 10 years' time and 20 years' time.
And the final question then, I mean, is this a 5-year project for you, or would you have broader or longer political ambition?
Well, I think I'd just think about 5 years and, get past the first post. It feels, if I can be successful and, have that privileged position, then fantastic. But, if I'd just look at that and then maybe look from there if I was successful. But, my eyes are clearly on trying to be successful in becoming, the next person in there. So that's where I'm focused at the moment.
That was businessman Peter Reid. Over the next few weeks, we hope to hear from all the LegCo candidates so you can make your own mind up on their merit. If you are standing, please get in touch with Phil Gorn at manxradio.com so we can arrange an interview. Let me know what you think and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, though, I'm Phil Gorn. Go to Mayo. Thanks for listening.